The 21 Lessons of Merlyn by Douglas Monroe. In Chapter 2, There Were Giants in the Earth. I remember waking as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window panes of my bedchamber. In that new light, the previous day's adventures seemed little more than a distant daydream. In my still foggy mind, I glanced quickly at the wall over my bed and recall feeling relieved by the small patch of black which was still there. Solomon's gift. Opening my hand, the confirmation was final as a small blue stone tumbled out onto the blanket. So it wasn't a dream, I said out loud, as all my night plans and hopes flooded back clearly to mind. How could I ever have doubted Merlyn? The morning dew lay heavily on the grass as I tugged on my clothes and hurried down towards the woods. My heart pounded with each step closer to my destination. Never had I felt so compelled about anything. What truly worried me was that the thought that my magical pebble might simply be a common stone, and Merlyn himself just a crazy traveller playing upon the hopes and imagination of an orphan boy. But doubt as I might, there remained a voice deep within me that cried out in joy at the prospect of some mystical apprenticeship under the druid from Iona. Something told me with certainty that I was soon to encounter the first real truths I had ever known. The haunting tones of the church bell beckoned across the fields as the ancient oak came into view. But that did not matter. Such was my conviction that, come what may, I would deal with excuses later. Nearing the tree, I stopped and searched my pocket for the blue stone, which would soon be forced to yield up its secret. I approached the spot with near reverence and peered quickly over the edge. Waves were crashing loudly against the rocks, but there were no visible signs of either Merlyn or of Solomon the Wise. I remember wondering how anyone could possibly hear such a tiny pebble fall to the shoreline below, be it magical or not. Nonetheless, I took one step forward and reached out. By the length of time I stood there, it seemed that my hand was not willing to obey my will, not willing to find out the truth after all. But at length the blue stone quit my grasp and fell noiselessly to whatever awaited it below. I suppose that I expected some dramatic appearance, complete with fire, smoke, and whatever else my Christian brothers would have related to a personage such as Merlyn. But there I sat on the grassy brink and waited, and waited, and waited, patiently, until falling asleep under the tree. "Merlyn!" I cried, sitting up with a start, as a firm hand grasped my shoulder. "Where have you been for so long, and why were you late?" "Arthur, my boy," Merlyn began, "if your future plans include studying with me, the first thing you must learn is that time is a man-made invention. And as druids, we are certainly servants of no man. One must learn to be as free as possible from those concepts with which mankind keeps himself chained." The druid must have noticed the confused look on my face, for he smiled understandingly and posed another topic. "Tell me," he asked, "are you afraid of the dark, little one?" "No, I don't think so," I replied in reserve, wondering if the true answer was all too obvious. "I mean, yes," I added, realizing that it was no use deceiving this man. Merlyn looked at me until I met his gaze eye to eye, and then said seriously, "You must promise never again to knowingly lie to me, for a druidic law of the highest importance states that respect for the truth measures the quality of our very souls. In our tongue it is said thusly, Iguirin erbin bid, the truth against the world. A druid's quest in life is really one constant search for the truth, wherever it may be found. Do you understand the importance of such a law, boy?" Feeling reproached, I lowered my eyes. The concept was nothing strange to me. Feeling reproached, I lowered my eyes. This concept was nothing strange to me, having been raised by a community of Christians devoted to the tenets of moral service. Merlyn did not speak to compensate for my silence, but offered a warm smile as a gesture of support. "I do promise, Lord Merlyn," I said, forcing a tense smile, and we laughed together. Do you know what I like to do best when feeling sad?" asked the druid. I shook my head. "Whenever I'm sad..." "Do you know what I like to do best when feeling sad?" asked the druid, as I shook my head. "Whenever I'm sad or discouraged, a sure remedy is to do something magical. Come with me." And with that, all the shadows vanished at once. "Where are we to go?" I asked, all excited. "Why, to the shores below," answered Merlyn, glancing us over as if looking for a reaction. "Am I wrong that you have long sought a way there?" How the druid could possibly have known that fact I was not sure, but, to my knowledge, Iltud had been my only confidant in the nature. We walked over to the oak tree and past it, pausing in front of a low cluster of tangled bushes. Merlyn parted the bushes at a carefully chosen spot and revealed an entrance to a small tunnel extending downward. For many long moments I simply stared at it in disbelief. I, who had prided myself on knowing every inch of the island, somehow had missed this tunnel. "I will go first and you follow," said Merlyn curtly, disappearing into the black opening. The tunnel was small but well made, with smooth slabs of expertly fitted stone lining the interior. Years later I was to learn that the tunnel had actually been the remnant of a prehistoric people who once inhabited Tintagel's slopes during the time of legends. Down I slid for what must have been 10 yards or more, before emerging onto a shallow ledge about 20 feet below the cliff line. There a footpath wound indirectly to the shore, completely hidden from above by the overhang. "You said you were afraid of the dark," Merlyn quipped as I stood brushing off the dirt. "How fine that you conquered your fear so easily." I managed to smile but said nothing, unsure of what he was leading up to. We followed the jagged shoreline around the base of Tintagel until the land bridge was in sight ahead. The going was rough for a person of my age, since the shoulders... The going was rough for a person of my age, since the boulders that demanded climbing were often several times my size, and so were the shoulders. But Merlyn was patient and balanced skillfully the help I needed with my need to make an independent show of things. Eventually I sat down on a small rock. Eventually I sat down. 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 Ready? Eventually I sat down on a small rock to catch my breath and noticed that the druid had gone on ahead. He was standing tall against the severe terrain, waving his arms and calling that I come at once. "There it is," he cried, pointing forwards as I reached his side. "That is the place." We stood upon a sandy beach facing into a large cove. Once I acquired my bearings, I realized that I had often watched from above as small boats moored on that very spot. But never had I dreamed what lay underfoot, embedded into the very heart of the mountain, nor had I ever heard men speak of it. Directly ahead loomed the opening of a giant cave. When I was young, Merlyn recalled, my teacher told me that this place was once inhabited by a race of giants who thrived between the stones and the sea long before men were around. Furthermore, he said that they themselves fashioned this great cave out of the mountain's living rock, dwelling here alone for centuries uncounted. Why, even today men often fancy that they can hear the ancient voices still echoing from within as they sail by to the waters beyond. Drawing near the entrance, Merlyn continued on with how his teacher had brought him here to learn secrets from strange beings of power, which he called the Shades of Stone and Sea. The sun had risen high in the sky by the time we reached the cave's gaping mouth. Even though the day was bright, I remember how eerie it was that no light of any kind penetrated within that black interior. When I questioned Merlyn about this, he answered that it was only natural, since the cave was home to beings of stone. One could no sooner ask a fish to visit a mountaintop than for light to linger here. He had said, intending to be humorous,
Ready.
He had intended to be humorous in the things he told me about the cave.
I'm ready.
But waiting by the entrance to that dark lair with no idea what the druid had in mind, I did not feel at all like joking. "Arthur," Merlyn began seriously, "you have made it clear that you wish to learn the mysteries of the world around us, have you not?" I nodded, but with cautious reserve. "Well then," he continued, "here we stand at the gateway between two worlds, the world of light and the world of darkness. And God in the beginning created nothing that was not a part of one of these two worlds. To become a druid is to become master over such forces of light and dark. Do you follow me? Not answering, my mind wandered back through the many Christian sermons I had heard, and it seemed that most were concerned with the struggle between good and evil. I asked Merlyn if this was the same thing. Although your priestly brothers would not say so, he answered, there is nothing in creation which is bad in itself, for everything has its part in the balance of nature. Only man, in his ignorance of such balance, labels things as good or evil. By our belief, darkness is no less good than light, which exists in divine contrast to its opposite. Think for a moment about that which surrounds us. Can you imagine night without day, winter without spring, the sun without the moon? Each element remains unto its self, since true balance is achieved by the existence of opposites, not, as most others believe, by their union. This is one of the great druidic truths around which my forefathers laid the separate foundations of both Anglesey and Avalon. But what has all this to do with me here? I asked, eyeing the cave in confusion. Think, Arthur, think for a moment, Merlyn shot back. Common man often goes through life afraid of anything not known or understood to him. Death, storms, the whims of chance, all those dark forces of life. Fear is the first heavy chain to be sundered on your journey into the mysteries, boy. And such fear is what brought us to this place. To vanquish fear, one must confront it. And now, so must you. I felt my legs weaken under me as Merlyn's plans suddenly became clear. Are we to enter the cave, then? I asked weakly. No, replied Merlyn with a glance. You are to enter. Remember, Arthur, that you were born a child of fire and light on high summer's day. The shades of darkness can hold little sway over you. Go now in this knowledge and be strong. Almost without thought, I forced 9 controlled steps inside. The walls of the cave were wet with slime, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed everywhere. I am a child of fire, I am a child of fire, I am a child of fire, I said to myself over and over, slowly gaining the confidence to advance further into the tunnel. Suddenly, the roof of the cavern became very high. The walls widened out so severely that I lost all sense of their location. No external light penetrated the interior, although the walls did seem to emanate a faint bluish glow, which enabled me to navigate fairly well. After a few more steps, the tunnel branched off in several directions, one of which seemed to hold a light source at its end. And it was this one I chose to follow, secretly hoping perhaps that it led back outside. It did not. I found myself within a large circular chamber, in the exact centre of which hung an immense globe of blue glass, suspended by webworks of thin rope. The rich blue glow radiating from the globe was obviously the same light source which had enticed me into taking that particular route. I remember staring as if frozen for minutes on end, transfixed by the mysterious beauty of the gem, until a sudden terrible sound broke my fascination. It was the sound of a voice, a deep, mocking laughter, which coursed through me like a chill wind. I shivered in the darkness, unable to pinpoint its source, while Merlyn's parting words flashed back to mind. To become a master, you must first learn to control your fear. Only then will you have authority over the sources of that fear. Slowly, as if guided there, I walked towards the blue crystal, choosing not to resist the pull, which, oddly enough, did not feel dangerous to me. Reaching up with eyes closed, I touched the great orb. At once the laughter ceased. A sense of calm victory washed over me, as from out of the dark came this strange verse. Ah, elfin tod, dear sindin nu, kerig uer verlurig nun, os sireith ech sapphire tu, verechlen mor, na crombar lun. The words seemed to flow into my mind like water as I became one with the shadows, remembering no more of the cave or of that day until my eyes opened to a bright sun overhead. I found myself lying in the grass under the oak tree while the sound of the church bells tolled in the distance against the sea. Running back towards the chapel, I searched quickly through my pockets. Sure enough, just as before, the tiny blue stone was there. Merlyn and his ghostly giants left me too tired and overwhelmed to immediately grasp the events of that day. Still, despite it all, those unknown words from the cave were always clearly before me.
There's a butterfly on the book.
Their mysterious message penetrating again and again into the furthest recesses of my being, erasing the past, while at the same time stirring to life memories of things I had never known.